Resident Evil has never shied away from showing the human cost of its stories. Right from the first game, the series stressed that the monsters you fight through are victims, and it did so with these surreal but heartbreaking reminders that these people were often aware of their degeneration. Since the beginning of the Renaissance, the games have brought that even more to the forefront of the narrative, showing the tragedy of characters like Robert Kendo's daughter, Elena and her father, and even the nominal villains like the Bakers and Evie. But for me, one of the best examples of the game showing rather than telling the tragedy of its plot can be found in the criminally underrated This Is Still Too Low, Resident Evil Revelations 2. While the games from RE7 onwards typically use the pathos to motivate the main characters to avenge the victims, Rev 2 shows that human cost in a subtler and sometimes more effective way. And yet, I'm aware that the word subtle is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, being used to describe a game where you fight zombie pigs, a big drillman covered in eyes, and third thing. Briefly, Revelations 2 begins when two of the four main characters are kidnapped from a work do and wake up in a prison. Rather than having been grateful to be rescued from a work event, Claire Redfield and Moira Burton find themselves on an island under the control of the Overseer, a mysterious figure conducting experiments based around a virus that responds to fear. As they progress, they and the player discover through notes left in the environment that the Overseer came to the island, promising its residents better lives through her investment. The crumbling, brutalist architecture and disused mines make it clear why she chose this island specifically. Its residents were desperate. Right from the start, the tone of the notes you find reflects that desperation, whether it was the hunger for a better life or the more immediate terror of those selected for her experiments with the T-Phobos virus. Secondary character Evgeny, and I'm not checking how that's pronounced either, later makes this backstory far more explicit in a bonus side story, but the main game does it admirably through environmental design. Early in the second episode, for example, you scavenge parts for a broken helicopter in a rundown fishing village. Many of its buildings are boarded up and clearly have been for years, but there's a sense that this was once a thriving community. The pub, though sparse, has a working jukebox, and incidentally, it's the site of one of the series' better cabin defense sections. The hamlet feels realistically lived in, and its abandonment explains why the island's residents were so susceptible to the Overseer's overtures. But the room that really brought the cost of her machinations home to me appears later in the same episode. After escaping the siege in the fishing village, you enter the main town, evidently the most densely populated area after the Overseer's arrival. Within one of its buildings lies this. It's a simple canteen. It's got a back office, it's got a dining area, and the kitchen from my house at university. It's got ads for some local booze, the flag of Sejam Island, and a poster of the Overseer. What assets are reused from elsewhere in the game have been used in a way that makes this room still feel wholly unique, which the game actually does incredibly well overall. Plates are scattered on the tables, and the lights are low for atmos. It feels like a working canteen, complete with a realistically pissed off chef. You can imagine coming here with your mates after a long day working in the new plant to toast the Overseer and her life-saving investment, at least until her enforcers burst in and take you to the lab. It's grimy, it's tiny, it's dingy, the service is wank. But between the Marie Celeste-like abandonment, which speaks to the speed with which the island's tragedy unfolded, and the numerous human touches carefully placed by the developers, to me this room really highlights the story of the islanders. They were desperate enough to swallow a pack of lies from someone who thought they were better than them, then they had to deal with a virus, and ultimately the island became a desolate wasteland, poorer in every sense than it was when they thought they had nothing. If you haven't, give this game a try. It is a fantastic asymmetrical co-op experience with some real heart, and arguably, it paved the way for the increased focus on humanity and tragedy found from RE7 onwards. And look, if nothing else, you can play as big burly Barry and make the tiny fragile little girl do all the heavy lifting, which is always a laugh.